All right, so we're going to finish, we're going to move on to section 3.3 again and do another video. We're going to do this one. This video is focusing on our standard deviation again, but now we're going to discuss a few different things because we can find the standard deviation of a population. So that's if we have every single data set that we're studying, it's all there. We can find the standard deviation of the population, which is the exact same way that we did before. Or we can then find the standard deviation of a sample and try to then use that standard deviation to predict what the standard deviation would be for the entire population. So the way that we did it in the video before, we were finding the standard deviation of the population or the standard deviation of the sample set that we had in front of us. So we only wanted the standard deviation of those numbers. But if you think about the example we did with the cans of paint, we want to go ahead and use that standard deviation to then predict what the standard deviation would be for the population, and that's where we use a different formula or a different method, slightly different for when it's a sample. All right, let's just go through this real quick. All right, so let's say that I am a lucky teacher, and I have a class that only have 6 students, and I want to find what and these are all their test scores, and I want to find what their standard deviation was of their test scores. So first thing I'd have to do is add them together and find their mean and divide by the number 6. And their mean in this case is equal to 85. And then I'd have to go through and fill out this chart where it's x minus 85. So that'll be 5, that'll be 10, that'll be 5, negative 5, negative 15, and 0. And then I need to fill in the rest of this chart. So 25, 100, 25, 25, 225, and 0. So that is taking this number and squaring it, is filling in this column. All right, it's something we already did in the last video. Then we add all these together, and after we add all these together, we would get the number 400. To find our standard deviation, we then need to divide by the number of data that we have, which is 6, so that would then be 66.6 repeating. This would be our variance, and then when we want to find our standard deviation, we then go ahead and take the square root of that, and that would then be equal to 8.2. So remember, you always want to round at the very end. You don't want to round in the beginning or anywhere apart our numbers because it can throw our numbers off a little bit. And we want to round at the end, and we want to round 1 decimal place less than where our data was. So since our data ended in the ones digit, we want to round in the tens. All right, so this we already did in the last video. Hopefully by now you guys are understanding this a little bit more. All right, now this is our population. It's my entire class. This is it. This is all my standard deviation can be used for. All right, but let's go ahead and look at the paint problem that we did in the last video. Or I guess this problem that we did here, we actually solved for the standard deviation of brand A. But either way, these months and these paint cans, this is a sample. So this standard deviation that we have here, or that we would solve for just these numbers, is only telling us the standard deviation for all of these specific numbers. Well, if we want to go ahead and predict what the standard deviation would be for maybe all of the paints for this paint brand, there's one different step that we have to do. All right, so let me create this table and fill it in really quick. All right, we knew that the mean already for this based on the very first thing that we did in the first video, but if we solve it again, the mean is 35. So we'll go ahead and subtract these. So it's 0, 10, negative 5, 0, 5, and negative 10. All right, then we will square all these. So it's 0, 100, 25, 0, 25, and 100. We add these together. That's equal to 250. But this is where it's different now. So when we want to find, if we want to find a standard deviation for just these 6 numbers or for the population, we divide by the total number of data that we have here. But when we want to use the information, this sample, to then predict what the standard deviation would be for the entire population, we need to divide by not 6 or not the number of data that we have, but it's the number of data that we have minus 1. So this would then become 250 divided by 5, which is then going to give us 50. And then we take the square root of that. And the symbol that we use now when we're solving for the standard deviation of a sample that we're going to apply to the population is we use the S letter that I just wrote there. And then the square root of 50 is equal to is equal to 7.1. So, I mean, this standard deviation then, if we want to predict and say what it would be for the entire population, we would use this formula and say that the standard deviation for all of brand B paint would be 7.1 months. Right? So that's why I want to point out in this video that there's a slight difference if we're applying the sample to the population or if we're finding the standard deviation of the sample versus when we're finding the standard deviation for a population. All right, that's it for this video. There's one more that you'll be watching for tonight.